I'm Christopher Lydon, and this is Open Source, reading our way out of a ruined time with the model reader, Patricia Lockwood. She's the poet laureate of the internet, just for starters. She's a big league literary critic, master of social media and the Twitter joke, but also of the mysticism of St. Teresa. She's on a field trip to Harvard this week from her home base in Savannah, Georgia, and we're meeting for the first time in Cambridge. You play so many parts, Patricia Lockwood, a novelist too. In this almost archaic culture of books, your mindset is very 2025. This side of Harold Bloom, I've never met a wider scope in a reader. Can you share the way you great readers seem to inhale the printed page, the ease and speed of your reading, the bodily experience of it too, reading to feed a raging imagination, reading to remember with instant and photographic memory, which you surely have. And let me just say, I hope this is the first of any number of conversations about books and an introduction to your mode of reading. I want you to teach me and our listeners to read the way you do.
Is it too late? Is it too early to begin to read the way I do? So it does freak me out a little bit to hear myself mentioned with Harold Bloom, because we spoke about him briefly and you said that he read how many words?
He said
how many pages?
His best cruising speed was the neighborhood of 1,000 pages an hour. I said, Harold, that's impossible. That's all of Proust in an afternoon.
Yeah.
But he said, test me. He called on his wife. In graduate school, she would poke him and say, you're just turning pages. And he'd say, ask me what I read. And he would virtually have memorized it.
Yes, so that's not how I do things. It's very funny also for you to say that I probably have a photographic memory. I don't. Something very interesting happens when you're in the process of reading very deeply for an essay or for a project of some kind, which is that it is all contemporaneous while you're reading those things. And the second you've written the essay, all of these things fly to the wind, and you can't remember a single thing. You don't know when they were born. You don't know the barest biographical facts about them. There's something about attempting, when you're reading, to identify with their writing self that makes it seem that you're there with them in their life while you're doing it. And then when you move on, it's like you've closed that and you walk away from it. And you have to be reminded of things that you said, things that you knew while you were doing it. So it's probably not exactly how you imagine it to be.
You make reading a sort of physical experience, and you said that you have an awful time remembering which character is which and who's doing what and where they are, but all the while you're sort of hand in hand with the writer,
yes,
the author.
That's different about me. So most people, when they're reading a book, they're entering into the narrative, into the story of the book, as if it were a movie, or into the characters. Whereas I always, from a very early age, was thinking about the mind that produced it and how it was doing that. So I always had an awareness of what was happening on the page, but not necessarily of, say, what anyone's name was, who was related, if there's a family tree or a map in the beginning, I probably will get lost immediately. But I had a sense overall, like a sun or a moon or something transcendent and higher, of someone making this up, of an intelligence making it up, but also an imagination. You're not just identifying with the intelligence of the author. That's something that you do as a critic. You take on their intelligence for a time, and you take on their style. But then there's this other thing that happens where you're in the mind that produces this, in the imagination that produces this. And that's where I think it can get a little bit weird. And if my reading seems different, unusual, freakish in its way, I think it's because I'm slipping in those moments into that identity of the person who is creating something, who has this intelligence that might lie separate from this imagination.
Harold Bloom said something like that. He called it the darkest depression of his life in his mid-late 30s, and he read Emerson's journals beginning to end. And what he said was that he felt Emerson was writing every phrase for him. And by the end, Emerson, he said, was the best and oldest part of me. The God within, he said. Seems to me an amazing gift and fruit of great reading is to have made a great soulmate of, say, Emerson.
Emerson. And maybe it's because you're freaking racing through that thing in a hot rod, Harold. Like maybe that's the reason that you're feeling this ecstasy within Emerson. So for me, it's very slow. and it's chipped out. And you asked me how you could do this, and I have thought about it. I know that it is different, and I know that part of it is a mistaken way of reading, or it's a neurological glitch, that sort of thing. I will often transpose words, transpose lines. I'll see halos around things or shadows in words. A lot of times reading, I'll get just, the barest beginnings of an aura, of a migraine. And for me, that's where it happens. That's where it really hits, is this state where you're not quite yourself anymore. You're not exactly in health or wellness or even totally sanity. You're seeing the spirits rise off of things. And that was always true when I was a kid. I think probably looking at family history, many of us are dyslexic. Many of us have learning disabilities. A lot of us are on the spectrum. We have all sorts of neurological differences. So I go slowly, and I encounter the words as pictures too. So I'm not necessarily reading for information. I talk in Priest Daddy about how I could see the shapes, the pictures of words and their real meanings, but not their information, right? So we did speak briefly about how I had done recently a podcast about Wuthering Heights. And I was saying that was, the nightmare sort of disaster book for me reading it as a child. Because you're like, God, it's like, this nest of Yorkshire vipers who all have the same name. And then everyone replaces everyone else. And then they go to live here. And then they go to live here. And everyone tries on each other's lives. So that sort of thing when I was a child, everything to me seemed about that confusing in a book. Anything that happened, I was like, why did that happen? So I was doing something else in my journey. I was really looking at words, I think, in a much more particulate or atomic way than other people were. So in order to do this, you have to break your own mind, and you have to, you have to do it in the wrong way. You can have too much coffee. You can have substances of other kinds that make things strange to you. Basically, it is about making it strange.
In your case, the story is all rooted in a most unusual family. You mentioned Priest Daddy, the title of your book about your father, 5 of you Sibs, Irish Catholic mother, but the priest who's now famous for discovering faith in submarine service in the Navy, but then coming out and becoming a Lutheran priest and eventually deciding that he wanted to be a Catholic. You say he was tired of grape juice, he wanted wine, and became sideways a Roman Catholic priest by a special dispensation of the Vatican. It's the story of everything, but what did it have to do with your reading? Your curiosity or your discipline? Your dad does not sound in Priest Daddy like a reader.
Well, Tom Clancy would beg to differ. Yeah, I write about that a little bit in Priest Daddy. It's basically huge libraries of theological tomes and then submarine books and Tom Clancy and all of those type of things. So it was water everywhere, but really not a drop to drink. I would look around at the bookshelves and be like, can I do anything with any of this? But it did have to do with my reading. Music goes into writing, but music also goes into reading.
Interesting. So glad you say that.
Yeah. So in the liturgical forms, as you're listening, you're hearing music into the words. So you do that very definitely, I think, when you read. And there is also something about, I don't know if it's the lighting, I don't know if it's the incense, I don't know if it's the concentration or the repetition or the getting up and down, but you do enter that heightened state in a church in the same way that you do when you're looking at the page. Things are just different, and there is a story being told, and you can't miss the moment. You have to be paying attention for that split second when things are changed.
Fascinating. What caught me anew in your work, I read you mainly in the London Review of Books, these long takeouts, often incredibly iconoclastic about all kinds of writing. But what caught me anew was your essay on mysticism. Old and new, the literature of holy ecstasy, let's say, and your conviction that it speaks a kind of truth to you. And the great William James, who we've got to talk about, is your witness, so to speak. Henry James's older brother, the better writer, some people feel, but an immensely, endlessly interesting figure to me, and I sense to you. But the question is really the matter of ecstatic prose and what it reveals to you. Where's to begin? St. Teresa of Avila, I suppose. Great favorite of William James, but the universal idea of a holy writer who changes lives. That would have been William James's test. Did it make a change in your life people's lives. But take us into your experience of mystical literature. St. Teresa, for example.
So we have several St. Teresas, or we have a Teresa and a Therese. We have Teresa of Avila, who wrote The Interior Castle, and we have...
16th century, and an autobiography.
Yeah, and I almost said we, like in French, and I have no idea where that came from. And then we have Therese of Lisieux, the Little Flower, as I'll refer to her, who was a Carmelite and whose older sister was the Mother Superior in the convent that she had joined. So this would have been in the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri in the 90s, a great time to be alive and a Christian. And we lived in this very strange neighborhood where in the few years before we moved there, a little girl had been murdered. So people did not play outside, and it was very still and sort of silent, and you walked quickly home from school, and you were a little bit afraid all the time. So we lived in the rectory, and just behind there was a little tiny hall that had a room with some books in it. And if I wanted to go to this place, I would hurry very quickly from my backyard, up through this vacant lot, trying not to get murdered, and then dash into this hall. And there
my heart is pounding.
Your heart's pounding, yes, you're following me. So I've set the scene. And then there's just this little room, and it smells like those places. You probably know how those places smell. I don't know if it's coffee, if it's paper. Pine Car Derby, what was that? I don't remember what it was called, but anyway, we would have those races there as well. But there was a room, and there was the Interior Castle, and there was the Cloud of Unknowing, and I think that there was the autobiography of the Little Flower. Have you read her?
I've not.
You would like that very much. You would like it very, very, very much indeed. So I had these three ideas. And probably this just had to do with the book covers or whatever. But, the Interior Castle, that's so architectural. It's white marble. You're really seeing this thing inside her. She reads differently than the other mystics do, I think. And the Cloud of Unknowing, we're like, who's that? And it's this big amorphous blob, like in the middle of the universe. And then you have this very, very specific, particular little girl dying of tuberculosis, in the countryside of France. Her own sister is the Mother Superior. And if you've never read a very great novel by Ron Hansen called Mariette in Ecstasy.
I've been told to read it.
Yes, but you should do it when you read The Little Flower's autobiography. It'll be very good tandem reading, those two things, because that was drawn very, very strongly from her experience. And I liked her. I liked her particularity. She had the most tremendous self-regard. Her book is almost funny in its self-regard. She knows that she's been entrusted with this enormous spiritual gift, and in anyone else it would seem like arrogance or that she was a little brat or something, and it just isn't that at all. And I like something about the concreteness of us calling her the Little Flower, because that's how she seems. So when I was a teenager, I also thought about joining the Carmelites, which was her order, and I think it's because she made such a strong impression on me in that book, which I so highly recommend. It's so funny. It's so funny to think about this child having this concept of her identity and her destiny.
The thing is, Patricia, we're going to talk about social media, but I have a sense, reading, especially your memoir, that your deepest interest is spiritual media. And it's one of the things you share, obviously, with William James, author of his last masterwork, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And the more eccentric and odd and maybe drug-infused the experience was, the more he liked it, the more he endorsed it in a way. You wrote, and it was melting to me in the London Review this past winter, you wrote, "Actually, I am passionately in love with William James. I would contemplate his figure on the wall, like a crucifix, for all time, and desire to remove suffering from him." You say, to read the Varieties of Religious Experience is to believe not only that God might exist, but that men might be good, and more that they may be taken at their word. How often do you fall passionately in love with a writer of a page you're reading, specifically James?
Every time. Every time, actually. And you can begin an essay or a piece of criticism just like hating someone's writing, or you can get to the point where you hate writing that you liked and you can still somehow talk yourself into being in love with them. I was completely in love with John Updike toward the end.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I just loved him.
Before or after you wrote the review?
During.
Review.
No, at that time.
Oh my God, it's the most scorching. You called it an assassination.
Is it though? Was I leading the reader a little bit? I don't know that toward the end
you were saying
it actually
to
was.
ask a 37-year-old lady To write about John Updike in the 21st century is obviously a hit job on order.
Well, it's the question, isn't it? So I believe the first sentence is, I was hired as an assassin. You don't bring someone like me in unless you want this kind of piece. The question is that the piece that I ended up writing? And was that the piece people ended up reading? So I'll say, in the age of social media, releasing these essays, it's a gamble and it's a roll of the dice, because you're not at all sure that people are reading the entire thing, that they're not just rejoicing in a pull quote, and that they're not just becoming gleeful, I think, at the very idea of someone being taken down. So my whole project is to read so thoroughly that you can't necessarily, by the end of it, feel that a hit job has been performed, even if the review was negative, or that it wasn't mixed if it was positive. So I don't know that that's a place that people get to now. It's a difficult, sustained length of reading that we're writing for in places like the LRB.
Yeah. The John Updike question, you did acknowledge all the things that have to be said about him. The elegance of every sentence, it seemed, the complete facility, the musical. There was something everybody said Mozartian about it. He was like Art Tatum at the piano. I mean, it had to be exquisite. But you held him to account for his sexism, for sure.
Sure. But that was a time that we were trying to get things into the novel, right? Now we're trying to get them out. We were looking at what could go into the novel that hadn't been there before. And obviously analysis and the experiential writing of the early part of the 20th century was a huge, huge part of that. Now it's a little bit, you do think more about what you're going to put in. And I think that the method is a lot more subtractive. So there was something in reading John Updike that was also, I mean, I recommend that people read him. It was freewheeling. It was all this stuff. You're like really talking about masturbating into the omelet that you're cooking for this woman in the morning and then eating it with her. It was so insane and bizarre. And you couldn't believe page after page there was something like that. And it was tremendously exciting. It was very ridiculous. It's not the sort of writing that anyone is doing now. So you're pointing these things out and you're also contrasting it with the writing of the age. But you're right. He was an enormously physical writer. He wrote beautifully, like a prodigy, synesthetically. Obviously, the basketball player is the easy comparison, right? And I think that there's some sort of image where he just waits for it to leave his fingers and then turns on his heel. He doesn't have to see it go in. I like that sort of thing. I like reading historically. I like reading men of the past. I like to know what people are thinking and what they thought in a particular time and what life was like then.
That's very generous of you, and he would be thrilled. I remember holding him to account, sort of, for the sexism and the objections always raised to his treatment of women. And he said it's up to them.
Yeah.
And they should be writing the story. They should be writing sex from their standpoint, and I've got to do it from mine, which is a fair defense. Did you like his theology, though? He was faithful in asserting his Christian outlook, which was not exactly fashionable either, but always eloquent, too.
So it was a little waspy for me, honestly. His side of religion, it was a little bit assured of his own salvation. I think I treat it in a bit more length in the actual piece, but we know reading John Updike that he's one of the ones that God loves, but you don't like it too much when people know that themselves, right? Which is maybe where you can bring him in a little bit with St. Teresa the Little Flower. But we should go back to James. I would like to know if there is any place that feels particularly haunted or filled with his presence here on campus, because he was a very legendary figure.
William
here.
James.
Yes.
It's interesting. Emerson Hall, where he had his office, and I remember interviewing his biographer, Robert Richardson, standing there against the plaque that says, "What is man that thou art mindful of him?" A very William Jamesian spot. And we were kidding about the fact that you could expect William James almost to turn up any moment. And you wouldn't have been surprised. A sort of jaunty, chin up, thinking, argumentative, curious presence. To my mind, he's still here.
Okay, so it's true then. There is a place where I can go to experience the presence of William James.
I'll take you to it.
Take me there.
And we'll see if the pulse changes, your pulse changes. I bet it does.
It will. And you wrote about, that I desire to contemplate him and remove suffering from him. Because I think he was a person who had suffered.
Yes.
And he was spoken of as being free from personal arrogance in his addressing of people in his teaching and in his lecturing. I think it was that. I always did actually have a problem with Henry James. I have a serious, vertiginous falling down staircases feeling with Henry James, which I know is my problem. And the day awaits when I will come to love him too. But for me, reading this Simon Critchley book got me really worried, okay? I had picked this book up.
Mysticism.
Yes, it's called Mysticism by Simon Critchley. Check it out yourself and see what you think, because it is a very rich compendium of all of these things that we're talking about and that we're interested in. But I had the thought reading that book, these are the things I love. These are the figures I love and have studied. Why do I feel like a total idiot when I'm confronted with the sentences and the rhythms of an actual philosopher? So I was like, oh no, it's me. I have a congenital philosophy problem. And so I picked up the Varieties of Religious Experience, having read him more spottily here and there, but never in such a sustained way. It was like standing under a waterfall. The way he spoke was so clear and direct, and it's because it's for those Edinburgh lectures.
Yes.
There was something in the method of address that was suited to the podium, to the actual place that he was giving these lectures. But there was something so clear and direct, and just the fact that he was just recounting these experiences that people had and then sneakily hiding his own among them.
I love that line. You said, if we trust William James for his pragmatism, we love him for his verve. That was what made me think I could figure a way to talk with you and keep the conversation
he's so
going.
full of pivots and he's so spicy, while at the same time it being a very plain mode of address, I think. He has these wonderful verbs, I would say. I think that I talk about his verbs in the piece, and they're so unexpected. And just...
You say arrogant, though. That doesn't strike me as right, except that he was a very overbearing big brother to Henry.
Yeah.
In his letters, he said, in effect, what is condensed to the line that my brother, Henry, can do absolutely anything with a story except tell it. He was a Patricia Lockwoodian critic of his kid brother.
I would have been a little bit harder on Henry. Particularly if I was sitting with Henry around the dinner table and he's trying to tell, the story of going to the grocery store that day, right? So I would have had huge problems with that. I would have been much harsher on him. But no, I think that it was specifically that his mode of address was free of arrogance. You can't know what a person's like in real life, in their discourses, in their intercourse with other human beings.
But you have to explain somehow, or get used to the fact that so many people referred to William James as the adorable William James.
Well, look at that picture of him as a gaucho. Can you even?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It's really so...
That's when he went to Brazil with Louis Agassiz.
That's right. And Simon Critchley has the good sense to include this. He had a great eye for sort of photographs and artworks, historical artworks, to include in the book to sort of deepen and enrich in our reading of those people. But it was that image that just really stood alone, because he's sort of standing in this way that's almost like he has the gunslinger hips. He's got these little gunslinger hips, and it is very, very cute. And so it is hard not to feel that way about him. I know that the critic and great reader herself, Jessa Crispin, was always on at people to read the Varieties of Religious Experience. And I think that for a long time I just stored that in the back of my mind, like one day you'll get to these books. One day there will be a reason to read these great tomes. And part of the reason I do love writing these essays, writing criticism, is because sometimes the day comes that it's time to read William James. And then you're doing it with a clear end in mind and in line with all of this other reading. And you really feel sent on a mission at that time. It's a higher version of the school assignment, which I did never do those. But I grew up in my adulthood, I was like, okay, give me homework for the rest of my life.
Wow.
It's so perverse, actually.
We haven't even touched on the fact that you were going to go to the great Ideas School, St. John's in Annapolis, and priest daddy said, sorry, we can't do it.
Yeah.
And you went right on with your self-education.
But I also just accepted his word for it, which really, in retrospect, either I knew inside me that I wasn't going to thrive in a place like that. I did end up visiting the Santa Fe campus of St. John's. as an adult, coming there as a writer, and I was sitting in one of the classes, and I don't think they knew that I was a writer. I think they thought I was a prospective student. And I was sitting there and I was getting excited and I was wanting to jump in. And that's how they say, you can tell whether you belong at this school or not if you really want to dive in and get into this conversation. But I don't know then. I mean, in my family, we're not exactly the sort of people who get the manual or who know how to do things. Like I say, I walk out of my hotel and walk exactly in the opposite direction, get immediately lost and fall down a manhole. So I think there was maybe something inside me that was like, well, yeah, okay, that's fair. At least in a room with books, I can control that. I know what I'm doing. There's no one to tell me I'm doing it wrong, which, as we have discussed, I am, but maybe, to great fruitfulness.
Come back to William James as a very serious student of ecstatic writing. You credit William James with feeling the truth in ecstatic prose, recognizing a sort of reality on the page, not just ranting. How do we readers, we people, come to accept that the mystical experience of grace or pure spirit might be a real thing? The question, as William James puts it, is how believe as common people believe? That's his question. Common people steeped as they are in grossest superstition. It's impossible, but it's their life. Their life. It's normal. It is happy. It is an answer to the question. He means that, I think, seriously, as a vindication of faith.
Well, and also a vindication of experience. So I say, if you have something that is like an ecstatic experience, some sort of experience on a hilltop, a conversion experience, you stand in the nave of a church and feel suddenly like you could believe, take that seriously. This is something that happens to you. This is your life. So William James is taking these people who ordinarily are not taken at their word. We're talking about lunatics, we're talking about sick people,
Right.
We're talking about people with epilepsy and all this sort of thing. But he says, to whom else would these visions be given than people with the strange sight? So that allows for such generosity and enormous latitude of feeling, I think, that you think, well, maybe it is a mistake that I saw this, or that I heard this, or that this vision came to me, but to whom else would it be given than someone susceptible to those things? So I say to Simon Critchley, if you felt that in that moment, in that church, you can take that seriously. You're allowed to take that seriously, not necessarily as something that was true or false, but something that happened to you. You can believe if you want to believe. This is the generosity we have to extend to people, even if we're not believers ourselves. So have you had that sort of hilltop or conversion experience, or do you feel a pull toward your old childhood religion?
I felt a lifelong attraction to religious practice in the Black church, in the Catholic church, in the old and new. I remember when God was a hard marker watching you. I'm in a new church where God is love, and we've got to get our heads around how much God loves us. That's the mission. I definitely am encouraged by William James's impulse that figuring these things out, who made us and why, are important to every single person.
I actually had a line in that mysticism piece that was cut that I really liked, but I did understand why they would cut it. And maybe it was because it was too naked of an expression, or it lapsed back into that sort of belief talk. But I say at one point that we are called not just to love God, but to love his love for Deborah. You know, there's this part where Critchley is talking about, on the one hand, that we have to believe people's experiences, and on the other hand, that it doesn't seem like people could have these sort of mystical experiences now. But they have throughout history, like they're having them every day. The more you talk to a person, the more you find out strange things that they've known, that they've believed, visions that they've had, strange states that they're embarrassed to talk about. All of those things still exist. So we can believe that, like the yoga mom next door, like these things can be in her life. She can feel this pull. We can respect this pull, that we have to love not just the fact that God loves us and we're, of course, intact and whole and pure and worthy of it, but that we have to look at the people who we don't think are necessarily worthy of it, and we have to love his love for them.
That's good.
They'd cut it.
Sounds right to me.
They cut it.
I love reading and hearing from you, Patricia, just the power of that early education. It's not something one can even bear to renounce or be done with. We're never done with it.
I wonder about the voice, because when it comes out, it does come out from on high. I've done readings in churches before. I did a reading in a church once with Sally Rooney where they had us in the sacristy beforehand, and there was a long black cassock hanging on the door. And I said, I'm going to put that on. And I did. And I put it on and I read from the pulpit. But there's something I distrust in myself. It feels like gold oil begins to flow. And I stand up there and something starts to come out of me. And then I don't know if that's my voice, if it's my Father's voice, if it's some greater voice on high. I don't really question it when it's happening, but I think, is that something I should distrust or something I should embrace?
I'd embrace it. Does William James speak to this moment, to people today, do you think? This impulse to restore or revive a taste for faith, a belief in faith, or to justify this hunger for ecstasy, transcendence, this will to believe. He did write a book on the will to believe.
He did, yeah. I think he can always speak to us. I think we're in a bit of a tricky, thorny, and potentially dangerous moment. It's something that I saw sort of in my household. The thing that I was constantly learning was what was about to happen. My father, as you say, he had that experience which should have made him, maybe a more liberal man, maybe a person who advocated for the married priesthood or something along those lines, since he had it himself. And instead he went the other way and he was a total trad, just absolute 100%. I'm the only one who gets to do this. I think he even had the sense that he was not as real of a priest, perhaps, as those other guys. I do wonder about that, whether he, in his heart, felt that he was not as genuine in his calling. Did you wonder about that? Well, I think actually, I don't wonder about it. I think it's probably true. Whether he's a real, yeah. I mean, they're all fake. So it's sure, he can be one. I can be one. I have sat at ordinations and felt it descend on my head. I'm in the room. Why can I not, take up the mantle myself? Why can't I receive the chrism and feel the tongue of flame above my head? But so what I saw with him was that early on, my sister, who remained Catholic, all of her kids went to church wearing the veils and did all the trad stuff. They homeschooled. And I thought, this just must be a peculiarity of my family. And it's not. It was a wider movement in the church, and it's the way it's trended now. And I think that there's something very serious to be considered in the fact that the Catholic Church, in a large mass, or a larger mass than it should have, has allied itself with Donald Trump in a way that I never would have thought possible.
Yeah, make that connection.
It makes no sense. So there's just a larger worldwide movement, I think, toward being trad. And I saw it first. And so it worried me a lot, because any movement I might have felt back toward the church was going to be stymied, basically, by that mass movement in the direction of the conservative. At the same time as having, a remarkably, in many ways, liberal pope who just pulled through. He's okay, isn't he? The pope is okay.
Yeah, he's alive, for sure.
He gave an address, didn't he? He's still with us. Someone emailed me out of the blue when he was really sick, and it seemed like he wasn't going to pull through. And they were like, "Do you want to come on our program and talk about the dying pope?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to do that. That'll totally jinx him. If I talk about the pope, I mean, he's a goner for sure."
William James revived respect for religion just in the sense that he thought it was not the buildings, not the doctrine, not the books, but the impulse in universal humanity. What do we make of that tension in the world today? Great masses of people, not in America for the most part, but wanting to be religious.
Yeah, it's easy to harden your heart against that impulse now, because you do feel it aligned with more, conservative powers and forces. So whenever I'm yelling at a writer, I'm yelling at myself too. I'm telling myself that you have to hear people's experiences and you have to take them at their word. You have to take people at their word. You can't be the voice from on high deciding these things for people's lives. They are the ones who decide. So that's why it's so invaluable that in those chapters, specifically where he talks about conversion experiences, that he just sets down what people say about them. I think that people would have a great deal of illumination in reading those chapters, even if they're not interested in conversion or mysticism or anything like that, because it's always, to hear people describe their own lives in those plain terms is always a very holy thing.
Yeah.
It's documentation.
And he's such a wonderful reporter, too, and listener.
Absolutely. And the listening, you feel it. There's a certain sort of speaker who, as they're speaking, as they're dictating, still seems like they're listening. And I don't know how you do that. I don't know how that's accomplished.
Back to you as a writer. You, Patricia Lockwood, took naturally to the new media, the internet, and Twitter very specifically, unlike our friend Harold Bloom, who thought it was the absolute end of the world. Although I've always thought...
He was right. Well, good old Harold.
The thing you have to note, though, that Harold was the internet. He had
it all in there.
Google, it was all in his head, and he could talk about the way poetic lines, wildly separated by time, I mean, Walt Whitman and Homer, let's say, were in conversation with each other.
Oh, yeah. It's all pattern recognition, it's phrase making, and it's the ability to hear the rhythms in your head.
Right. But he had it in his head. What was the formative experience for you of being a Twitter child?
A Twitter child. I was pretty old once I got on Twitter. So it was more formative probably that I grew up with just kind of the internet in the, corner of the rec room or the TV room or whatever, and you had to physically get on it, almost like you were climbing on a donkey or something. You had to just physically get in this state where you use the internet. But then after that, for a very long time, up until 2011, I never had a cell phone at all. I just had, a little phone sitting in the corner like a person from the past. So I never had this experience of the gradual encroachment of being more and more online. I was just suddenly, in terms of Twitter, totally online. So what happened there was that I had a very surreal writing style, I would say, a very surreal feel for jokes that just kind of dovetailed with a kind of comedy that was happening there. So I hopped on and it was almost instantly as if I had a circle of friends who had been waiting there. And that was a very creative moment for Twitter. It was the year before the election, when Obama was reelected. So it was this moment in time that was just purely creative and just like puppies rolling around in the mud. That's sort of how it felt. But what was true is that I had been submitting my work in a traditional way. The old like paper envelope, sort of like big fat SASE type thing. Like I had been doing that, and I had gotten a poem in the New Yorker just before, I believe, my Twitter ascendancy happened. So there was this widespread feeling that I was a person who became published or was recognized because of Twitter. But it was actually the good old-fashioned like legwork from the ground up that we had been just grinding out for probably 10 plus years at that point. And it made it all seem like lightning fast, like a flash in the pan had happened. But it was really still very, very traditional the way I did things.
It helped also that you were incredibly clever and funny on Twitter.
It was a kind of humor that is just really well suited for the internet where no one really has a body. It's about like cartoon characters and cereal mascots and things that physically can't happen, Like the way that I would write the old Twitter sexts or the jokes of that nature, they were sort of like setting up a little narrative that was kind of physically impossible and no one had a gender and everyone was kind of an animal, right? And they were existing a little bit like in capitalism, but not totally. So that was just kind of the internet style. And it's something that I think people are nostalgic for now because it's a lot harder to write in that pure way.
I'm trying to think of your famous ones, like at Paris Review. So, how is it?
Yeah. You know what's so interesting about this? It's one of those misremembered lines like in Casablanca or something like that. Like it's a thing that people always remember individually a little bit differently. Funny. So the actual thing is, so is Paris any good or not? Which is a very like confrontational, aggressive thing,
wow.
But a lot of people remember it that way. A lot of people remember it as, so how's Paris? So it basically reflects people's personalities as to how they remember this, where it's like, here's looking at you, kid. Like it's not actually what the line is, but it's so interesting because it's reflective just of people's minds.
Like, play it again, Sam, which she never said.
Yeah, that's not said. That's not the line. And so what in us, are we making it a better line collectively by misremembering it, like all of us as a group? I don't know. I always liked that, actually. It never offended me. I always thought that it was really great.
Round up the usual suspects, for sure. It's occurred to me reading your prose, Patricia, there's something of the internet about it. It's infinite. It's everywhere. It's absorbing the whole chaos of contemporary experience. You're the person above all I'd want to ask, what I'm always asking myself, what is this medium that's rewired every human connection in the world, including intimate connections?
Yeah.
What is it doing to us? 100 years from now, it will have been the transformative experience of our time. And yet we never add it up and check the results as William James would want us to do.
Empirically, no. Because we're still in the middle of it. It's still happening. It is that tidal wave. I think you're right. I wouldn't claim to be the internet in a Harold Bloom sense, but I did feel when I got on that I was closing some circuit, that like the line of electricity was then able to travel fully, and that I was the person who brought it into its full circle, which is insane. Why would I even say that? But I don't know how we're going to look on it in the future. But when I was writing my book, no one is talking about this,
Yes.
which very seriously takes on the internet in the first
porthole.
half. The portal, yeah. A lot of people thought that it was frivolous to write about the internet, even at the point that I was doing it. And past that point, we saw that it's where everything that has led to the current state of the world was really happening. So I thought it was strange that everyone was in this place. It was absorbing so much of our day and so much of our attention and what we were doing, and it was still not seen as a proper subject for literature. So I don't know how it's going to be seen. I do think it was a fit subject for literature. I think it continues to be, but it's not going to be me doing it anymore. I had to get off that mess. So I made the little skip from X to Blue Sky for a while, and then at the inauguration time, I was just like, oh yeah, I'm not doing that again. I'm writing a novel. I'm doing something else for the next
Good.
4 years.
I want you to advise us about the novels we should be reading.
So this is more
The
difficult.
ancients and the moderns.
Yeah, this is more difficult for me. But I will say something that unlocked the novel that I'm working on now, and I think would be great for people to read again. It's a little bit forgotten. It's William Saroyan's Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze. It's such a great...
I have an autographed copy of it.
Do you really?
I adore that book.
I'll tell you what happened to me.
Myself Upon the Earth.
Yes, I loved it. And all right, so I'll tell you, I have a period where I'm sort of gathering material for a novel, trying to get into it, and you don't know how you're going to write it yet. But his stories are so short, and they're about big feelings. You wake up and you are on
goosebumps.
planet Earth, and you have a typewriter, and you have a cup of coffee, and that is, I think, what we can look to. You have this day, you are upon this earth, you have a typewriter, use it.
The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze, William Saroyan. Can't go wrong. Patricia Lockwood, it is a joy to meet the person behind this incredible range of poetry and writing and jokes and reviews and surprises. I got to go back and reread your piece on Updike for the good parts, but let's do this again. I want to read the way you read.
Absolutely, I'll teach you. Thank you so much for having me.
Will There Ever Be Another You is the title of Patricia Lockwood's second novel coming in September. Here at Open Source, we count on our listeners for support. If you haven't done your part yet, now's the time. Please go to radioopensource.org/donate and pitch in to keep the world's first and longest-running podcast going strong. Open Source is proud to be a member of Hub and Spoke, a Boston-based collective of independent, creator-owned podcasts. Our shows range from history to politics to art to technology. We come together around the principle that independent voices and independently funded media are more important than ever. You can learn more at hubspokeaudio.org. Thank you